This decadent cookies and cream cake is made with Oreo buttercream sandwiched between layers of moist chocolate cake and wrapped up in more Oreo buttercream, topped with pretty swirls and Oreo cookies. To make the Oreo buttercream is really very simple. Make one batch of my 4-minute buttercream for an 8-inch cake, and you'll need 12 Oreos. To incorporate them, you'll need to crush them to make crumbs, and you can do this in 2 different ways. The first way is to put the Oreos in a Ziploc bag and bash them around with a rolling pin or a mug. This makes all sorts of sized chunks of cookies, which add nice texture to buttercream, so it's great to use in buttercream as filling between the cake layers. But the chunks are a nightmare for smooth frosting. So I divide my buttercream into 2 bowls, and to the first bowl, with just enough buttercream for the filling of my cake, I add 2 Oreos broken into chunks using the Ziploc bag method. Then I put 10 Oreos in a food processor or a blender and blitz them until they're really fine, almost like a powder. I save about 1/4 cup of crumbs to use later in the recipe and add the rest of these crumbs to the other bowl of buttercream, which I use for frosting the cake and doing some piping on top. Stir this buttercream as little as possible, because if you keep mixing, instead of white frosting with black specks, you'll end up with grey frosting, which doesn't look very appealing. If you're enjoying this tutorial, please like it by clicking the thumbs up button and subscribe to my YouTube channel for a new cake decorating tutorial every week. If you use both methods of crushing the Oreos into chunks and crumbs, you'll have 2 different buttercreams. But if you like, you can just blitz all 12 Oreos in a food processor or blender and use just these fine crumbs in the whole batch of buttercream, to use for both filling and frosting the cake. To assemble your cake, attach the first layer of cake to a cake board with a dollop of buttercream to secure it. I use my perfect chocolate cake for this, because it's not very sweet, so it balances out the sweetness of the Oreo buttercream nicely. Spread a layer of buttercream on top of your first layer of cake. I'm going to make a 4-inch mini cake in this video, but I've listed the ingredients for different sizes of cakes on the recipe on BritishGirlBakes.com, and the link is in the video description. I like to chill my cake layers in the fridge for about an hour before I do this, so that they firm up, and that makes them easier to move around and to frost. Alternate your cake layers and buttercream, and then use the buttercream with fine crumbs of Oreos to frost your cake. I almost always cover my cakes in a crumb coat before applying a final coat of frosting, so that any crumbs that come off the cake get trapped in the crumb coat and don't get into the final coat of frosting. But this cake is an exception. I skip the crumb coat and just spread on 1 thick layer of frosting, and I do this for 2 reasons. The first is that my perfect chocolate cake isn't very crumbly when it's cold, so as long as you chill the layers before assembling and frosting the cake, you shouldn't get any crumbs in your frosting. The second reason is that the frosting is white with tiny flecks of black cookies, which look identical to crumbs of chocolate cake. So if any crumbs do come off in your frosting, you won't notice. As you smooth your cake, keep the frosting you scrape off in a bowl to use later. When your frosting is nice and smooth, pour the rest of your Oreo cookie crumbs around the cake board and push them into the bottom inch or so of frosting on the cake, to make a border around the bottom. I'm using my offset spatula to press them in, but you can use the back of a spoon instead, or your hands. You can put the cake on a baking tray to catch any crumbs that fall off while you're doing this, for an easier cleanup. For the top of the cake, press an Oreo into the frosting so it goes right up to the edge of the cake. Press another one in opposite, so if this was a clock, they'd be at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. And then put a cookie in the middle on each side, so these would be 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. Then add 1 more cookie in between each of these, and by adding the cookies in this order, you're making sure they're spaced evenly around the cake. You can add as many cookies as you like, and you'll probably use more for a bigger cake than this little 4-inch mini cake, but make sure you leave enough space between the cookies for the swirls of buttercream we're going to add next. Fit a piping bag with a star tip, like this 1M tip, and fill the bag with the leftover buttercream from when you frosted the cake. Now hold your piping bag vertically, with the tip facing down between 2 Oreo cookies, and pipe a swirl by spiraling the bag upwards, and when you get to the top of your spiral, release your pressure on the piping bag as you lift your bag away from the cake to leave a neat peak on your swirl. If you let your piping tip brush against the sides of the cookies as you pipe, you'll make the swirls go all the way up to the sides of the cookies, so you'll completely fill the gaps in between the cookies, which looks tidy, but it's also an extra support for the cookies so that they don't fall over. Having very, very fine crumbs of Oreo cookies in the buttercream in the bag means you can pipe the buttercream through the star-shaped tip, and crumbs won't get wedged in the points of the star and block the buttercream as it tries to come out. And there it is, a deliciously decadent cake that looks beautiful too. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel for a new cake decorating tutorial every week.